Happiness. Everyone is looking for it, but we look for it in all the wrong places. What if we had a guide that showed us what John Wesley called the complete art of happiness? We do. Join us this fall as we look at the Sermon on the Mount. One sermon that changed the world. Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to give your heart. One day, every tongue will confess you are God. One day, every knee will bow. Still, the greatest treasure remains for those who gladly serve you now. We ask God to give us blessings on this service, and we want to be what He's called us to be because it is His Son who said, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. You heard it was said to them of old, you shall not murder. But I say to you, whoever is angry with this brother is liable to judgment. And whoever says an insult is liable to the council. And whoever says you fool is liable to the hell of fire. So if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember your brother has something against you, go, be reconciled to your brother, and then come back and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly while you're in the way to court, lest he hand you over to the judge to the guard, and he puts you in prison. I tell you the truth. You will not get out until you've paid the last penny. You also heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, whoever looks at a woman with lustful intent in his heart has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it away, for it's better to lose one member than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand offends you, cut it off and throw it away. It's better to have one member lost than for your whole body to be cast into hell. The next one is actually a verse we didn't cover last week, and so we're going to cover it now. Would you stand for the reading? I'm going to read this one, and I'd like you to read with me the one about oaths. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Now let's all say it together. Again, you have heard that it was said of them of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Please remember. On either side of the road, there is a ditch. Preachers know that when you are reading the Bible, how you read the Bible can determine whether you and others will be walking straight or if you'll fall in either ditch. If this was an audience full of people raised Lutheran or Reformed or something of that flavor, I would imagine some of you would read the Sermon on the Mount and say, you know what I get from this? I'm awful, and I can't do any of this. Isn't it great that Jesus came and did this for us? And I would look at you and I'd say, yes, we are sinful and weak. Yes, it is wonderful that Jesus came and did what I could never do by giving me salvation. And yes, only Jesus lived a perfect life. But this is really meant to be lived. There's ethics in this sermon. We're supposed to look more like Christ today than we did yesterday after reading this lesson. There's ethics there. That's what I would say. But I imagine that background does not represent most of the people in the audience today. In fact, I am so grateful that many of you were taught to read this text in a balanced way. But if there is any extreme tendency, any problem reading, my guess is it would be the other ditch. It would be something like this. Of course there's ethics in this text. So what's the new rule? Let's see. Jesus says, don't say fool. So whenever my child says fool, I'm going to wash his mouth out with soap. That's the rule. Put it on the list. Let's see now. There's lust. Okay. That must mean that any movie over a certain rating, let's say rated R, is hands off for a Christian. Obviously, put it on the list, especially if it's got nudity in it. And let's see, I want to make sure that we're keeping this. It says that if you look lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. So how much lust does my husband have to have done for me to put my no good husband away for adultery, which of course is a reason for divorce? Check the list. I think we think that Jesus is giving us a checklist of do's and don'ts. And I want to suggest that what Jesus is actually doing is he's pushing us to think beyond rules. And it's very, very hard for us to imagine that thinking beyond rules means that there may not be the clear line, the tangible statement that helps me go to bed at night knowing I've checked the box. We want a verse that says, don't do blank. Don't smoke, don't drink, don't do drugs. Modest clothing is clearly 1 inch above the knee, or 1 inch below the knee, or 1 inch above the ankle, or 1 inch below the ankle. Give me the rule. And Jesus comes along and says, just as clear as I'm standing here, I want you to think beyond rules. It's hard for us. That thinking beyond rules can actually mean, because of the hyperbole Jesus uses, that you can literally do the thing he says not to do, and you can literally not do the thing he literally says to do. But it's true. It is not a sin to use the word fool. Both testaments do it. It is wrong to pluck out your eye or to cut off your hand as a way to fix a spiritual problem. In fact, I believe the hyperbole Jesus uses is meant to make this point. You can't fix a lustful heart by plucking out your eye. Blind men lust. This is the point he's trying to get across here. It's a spiritual problem. And it's just not the case that any nudity is off limits. I've heard Christians say that art textbooks should not include any pictures of barely clad, scantily clad, no-clad images, as if the sculpture of David is an abomination rather than a clear attempt at beauty. And so we do this. We go places. Sometimes we've had missionaries who've gone off to Africa, found cultures where you had some women who didn't cover certain parts of their body. The men were fine with it, and they were told you were sinning for doing so. And we, like in the Garden of Eden, created a problem where there wasn't one before. We've got to look at what he's really getting at, which is beyond our sense of rules. Rules are not for the righteous. They're for the unrighteous. When we can't or don't or won't see with spiritual eyes and live with renewed hearts, we have to impose rules. It's a sign of our immaturity. Jesus is raising the bar. And so it is in the next two sections of this powerful sermon. Take the second one first. Jesus says, don't swear at all. I remember being told in Sunday school class when I was growing up that this means don't use swear words, or maybe don't say OMG. Now, I think it's actually a pretty good argument to think about. You know, in the Old Testament, the Hebrew people didn't even use the name of God. They wouldn't say it out loud for fear of desecrating the holy. So I could hear the argument this way. If our ancestors would not mention the name of God on the most holy things, don't you think you shouldn't invoke it to describe how excited you are at the latest Taylor Swift album? I get it. But that's really not what he's talking about here. If you look at the header in your Bible, it probably says Jesus is teaching against oaths. Oaths. He uses examples. Swearing by the temple, swearing by the earth. And now we start feeling nervous. Did I sin when I took the Boy Scout oath? Or when I served on jury duty? Or when I was on the witness stand? I don't think that's what he's talking about either. Do you realize that when you enlist in the army, or when you say the Pledge of Allegiance, or even when you say I do in a marriage ceremony, you're taking an oath? In the Old Testament, a priest could actually make you take oaths, and you could take the Nazirite vow voluntarily. In the New Testament, Paul says, I beseech you by the mercies of God, or I declare by the living God, or in Romans 1 verse 9, God is my witness. Clearly, if we're just talking about the wording, not a sin. What about the divorce passage that comes just before this one? You probably have heard at times the idea that Jesus is writing case law. That what he's doing here is he's giving us clear definitions, clear examples to cover anything you ever wanted to know about marriage and divorce. My question would be this: do we really think that Jesus uses hyperbole, overstatement, and exaggeration in every other case in Matthew 5 except this one? What if he's going beyond case law rules to challenge our hearts? What if you heard it this way? You say you don't want to commit adultery, but do you realize the system you've set up creates more adulterers? When you write a certificate of divorce and you send your wife away for some frivolous reason, you've created an adulterer. And when somebody marries them, they commit adultery. Do you really want to stop adultery? Stop with all the divorcing. This is what Jesus is getting at. We want Jesus to give us clear rules, and because of that, I think we end up looking for our Christian out to get out of a relationship we don't want to be in, or a clear line so we can tell other people they can never get into something that they've gotten out of. And I want to suggest that when we do that, we're reading Jesus the way the Pharisees read Moses. We miss the point. And Jesus comes to us and says, don't you see what I'm doing? I'm challenging the reason you go looking for a rule in the first place. Then we come to oaths. Riley came home from Sunday school and said to her parents, I learned about telling the truth and lying in class today. Her mom said, that sounds great. What is a lie? Riley is trying to remember all the memory verses, and she said, well, a lie is an abomination in the sight of the Lord and an ever-present help in time of trouble. Isn't that true? Do you remember the show To Tell the Truth? CBS started it back in 1956. Can you guess who was the host? Bud Collyer. Anybody remember that one? Before my time. All right, so he was the host, and this show has gone on in different forms every decade since then. You have 3 contestants. One of them has a really great, interesting story or background. And you have 4 celebrities who are supposed to guess which one is the story talking about. The job of the other 2 of the contestants is to lie. They're supposed to really get in character, make you think they're the one being described and get you to choose them. The lie is the point of the story. It works great on TV. It's terrible in real life. Suppose that you're newly married. Everything seems to be going well. And then I say to you, in this envelope in my hand, I've got 100% proof whether your spouse has ever cheated on you. We hook them up to a lie detector test. This is 100% valid. Do you want to look in the envelope? This question has been asked to college students across the country. Students who don't think that there is a God, don't think that morality matters at all to anybody but me. Everything is whatever you want it to be. And 4 out of 5 say yes. You know why? Because it's pleasurable to think that I'm in a trusting relationship, but there's no amount of pleasure that'll take the place of knowing what is true. We will stand cold and naked, face to face, the truth in order to hang on to what really matters. Truth lies at the heart of all of our relationships. It's part and parcel of the fabric of society. Think about how important truth is to everything that matters to us. Without truth, for example, there is no trust. I'm skipping ahead here. It was Immanuel Kant. He was a great philosopher who had a Lutheran upbringing, and that really affected the way he thought. He created a whole system of ethics to decide what's right and wrong. Tell me if this one sounds familiar to you. He said the way you know what's wrong is you have to imagine. Can you imagine a world where everybody does that whenever they want to? And if you can imagine it, would you want to live in a world where everybody did that whenever they wanted to? His chief example was lying. Can you imagine a world where lying was the rule of the day? If that was the case, you could never know for sure how much money is in your bank account. You could never know if that package you ordered is really on its way. Well, we'll leave that one alone. Can you imagine a society where every business CEO only told the truth about their product if there was money in it? Where every teacher was a fraud, every preacher was a sham. And you may say, yeah, I can imagine a world like that. Would you want to live in a world like that? Kant says, if ethics means anything, lying is so clearly and obviously wrong because truth-telling is at the heart of trust. Without truth, there can be no rights. We love our rights. We talk about it all the time, but if you listen carefully, what you get from people that don't believe in truth is the language of rights, but all they mean is power games and manipulation. They don't talk about rights in any way other than an identity of a group that's fighting for its interests, but there can be no such thing as inalienable rights if there's no such thing as truth. I'll give you one more. Without truth, there can be no freedom. Os Guinness helped me see this one. He gave a couple of examples. So do you realize that freedom isn't just freedom from something like addiction? It's freedom for something. If you want to be free to be you, what you mean is there's a true you that ought to be respected. G.K. Chesterton had a really interesting illustration. He said, imagine you have 2 cages. You have a tiger in one and a camel in the other. And someone says, set them free. So you remove the hump from the camel and the stripes from the tiger. Of course you wouldn't do that. To remove the hump from the camel or the stripes from the tiger is to manipulate their identity. The only way you know what it means for them to be free is to know what they really are in truth. Truth is required for freedom. In his Nobel speech, Alexander Solzhenitsyn declared, one word of truth outweighs the entire world. Or as Jesus put it, only the truth will set you free. Jesus places the divorce passage between the one about lust and the one about oaths. And I think when you read the commentaries, sometimes they'll treat it with the one above it or the one below it for good reason. The one above it is about lust. And you can clearly see that lust leads to divorce. In fact, it's anger and then lust and then divorce. Think about the divorces you know about. Usually, it's anger that causes you to put them away, or it's lust that caused them to put you away. Divorce comes right after the lust passage. Makes sense. But it also comes just before the oath passage because think about it. Divorce is a public lie. It's an announcement that says, I know I said I do, but I don't. If I can't trust you in the most important relationship of your life, how can I trust you when you tell me something small? Like when you're trying to sell me your used car. The used car salesman is synonymous with white lies and half-truths, isn't he? Do you remember the Brady Bunch episode where Greg tries to sell this car that doesn't work very well? Is it weird that I know that it was episode 3 of season 4 and it was called The Wheeler Dealer? Greg gets this car and it's terrible. And he got it because the guy who sold it to him was lying. So he's going to try to do the same thing for the next guy. Just fabricate the truth. But he can't use the word lie. So he says he's gilding the lily. Oh, we hear people gilding the lily all the time, don't we? The product that we bought on Amazon or the picture we saw when we rolled down the window to order our food always looks better than the thing we actually got in the mail, doesn't it? You learn that the French fry in the ad isn't a French fry at all. It's a piece of plastic. That's not ice cream. That's mashed potatoes. You know why the sauce looks so juicy? Because they put wax in it. We can lay it on real thick too, can't we? There's a word for all this. Manipulation. We manipulate our pictures on social media. We airbrush out any problem that we see, and we create an image that never existed in real life. We call it putting our best foot forward. We see the media do it after a political debate, but they're actually honest about it. You know what they call it? Spin. I once heard of a school who thought that their science department was not as good looking as their art department. So they got their art teachers to put on lab coats and hold test tubes and took pictures to put in the catalog for the science section. Did I tell you it was a Christian school? And they call it effective PR. Manipulation. It's become second nature to us. Always coaxing, always sugarcoating, always trying to tailor our words to fit what we want you to hear rather than what is actually true. Manipulation. Leaving things out, adding things in, twisting, distorting, revising, and retelling. And we always have a good reason. I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't want to reveal my mistake. I don't want you to think less of me. I don't want to lessen the effectiveness of my pitch. And so we manipulate and we do damage to the truth. Let's admit it. Studies show that we tell a lie every 3 minutes. And in 2 out of every 3 conversations, someone deceives someone else. When we tell that story again, the one we've told many, many times about our fishing trip, and the fish gets bigger every time. When we add a line in our resume that wasn't true, but it made us look and sound better and covered up one of our weaknesses. When we padded our business expense account. When we mirror whoever we're talking to, changing what we really think to agree with what they're saying. So you won't think less of me and you'll find me likable and you'll think I'm in the know. Instead of admitting, no, I haven't read that book you're talking about. No, I don't agree with that view. Yes, I have been talking about you behind your back. No, I didn't pray for you last week like I told you I would. What if there was a drone with a powerful microphone and it picked up every word that you spoke the entire day, in public and in private? And then the next day it replayed it for all the world to hear. Would your words to them match up with what you said about them? Jesus is making a very simple point. Tell the truth. Mean what you say. Keep your word. Let it be as good as gold. Speak truth to your neighbor. Reveal the situation for what it is, and don't engage in verbal manipulation. I'll tell you how they did it. In the first century, Jewish people would say things that they didn't really mean, but if they added a line that says, well, you can take this to the bank because I swear by the heavens, or I swear by the earth, or I swear by the temple, then you'll know I really mean it. And if you're wondering if they were trying to dance around the name of God, yes, they were. Why? Because of the way they read a statement that was meant to go to the heart, but they read it as a rule. And that's the third commandment. Do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Now, you might intuitively see one obvious problem with their interpretation of the commandment. I mean, they went for the wording, not the meaning. You might say they went for the letter of the law, not the spirit of the law. But I see another problem. The passage that Moses gave us isn't even talking about your words primarily. I learned this from a Jewish person. What would they have thought when they heard, "Don't take the Lord's name in vain"? They would have thought that because you belong to God, you wear a stamp, a badge that declares you to be His, and what you do says something about God. I once heard of a youth minister in the South, in a dry county. He was driving a church van with the church name printed right there on the sign, on the side. All of a sudden, the van goes out, and he has to sort of let it coast, and it coasts into the parking lot of an ABC store. It was a very hot day. He goes inside, he buys a Coke, and all they have is a brown paper bag, so they put it in the brown paper bag. He comes walking out. As he's walking out, holding the brown paper bag and the church with the church name right along the side of it, one of his friends comes driving down the road. Without even thinking about it, he goes, "Hey, how you doing?" It was one of those moments when he says, I wonder if everything I do, every way I do it, would be something that I wouldn't mind everybody seeing and knowing. Using the Lord's name in vain in the context of the Jewish people called by God is simply this. You have the name of God stamped on your forehead at every moment. Do you live in such a way that you'd be embarrassed by any of it? Jesus is trying to get us to seek the heart of God, to be people of the truth, for our words and our deeds to match. And when we say, well, I was pinky swearing, I didn't invoke the name of God, it's okay, I didn't really mean it, we forget that everything we do invokes the name of God, because the name of God abides in you. So put it all together. What are these two passages trying to teach us? They're teaching us how to apply the two great commandments. We're supposed to love God by putting our trust in God, which means trusting God with your future. If we aren't acting out of anger towards someone, or lusting for money or power as if we wanted something from someone, think about how that would free us. We can live lives so pure and simple, so full of God's goodness, that we could care less whether we made much money or little from the car that we're selling. We have no reason to change the story or to manipulate the outcome. We take what comes because we believe what comes is from the Lord. As a little boy quoted Psalm 23 in verse 1, "The Lord's my shepherd, I don't want nothing." Number two, we go about loving our neighbor, really loving our neighbor, to love our neighbor as if it was us. We put their needs before ours. We put the truth above all. And so loving your neighbor means loving them enough to tell them all the things that's wrong with the car you're selling. It means loving them enough to tell them the truth and not to make up an excuse. even if it doesn't look good, even if it hurts. We treat them as we would want to be treated. Can you even imagine a world like that? Complete, honest, unadulterated truth. I can. And it's because God, your God, is the way and the life and the truth. And I know this. My God says that I will be with you. I am truly yours. No ifs, ands, or buts. No qualifications. Not only when you do it all right. I'm with you all the time. You know how I know that? Because our God covenanted with us. He said, I do. And he will never leave you nor forsake you. I swear to God. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've been encouraged. I hope you've been enriched. And if you have any questions, any thoughts, any comments, reach out to us at prayers@wschurch.net. God bless you. Tune in next week.